the email was sent by Nathan Screslet, which is in two different meetings.
Okay, yeah, so it says Nathan Screslet Green. Thank you for joining us today. The meeting will begin shortly.
Yeah, they just gotta wait.
Okay,
All right, all right.
thanks.
Good morning to everyone, and welcome to all of you to the first meeting of JLARC. It's really nice to be back before the commission. I'm Hal Greer, the staff director, and I want to extend a special welcome this morning to the new members of the commission, Senator Locke, Senator McPike, Speaker Fillercorn, Delegate Torian, and Delegate Sickles. And Senator Spruill, for you, it's a welcome back to JLARC. I believe that you're the first member of this commission to ever serve both as a delegate and as a senator.
Thank you.
Joining me from JLARC this morning are Senior Associate Director Justin Brown and Associate Directors Kimberly Sarte and Tracy Smith, as well as our graphics and technology expert, Nathan Screslet. The first item on the agenda is to go over meeting logistics. I'd like to turn it over to Nathan, who will discuss those with you. Nathan?
Good morning, members of the commission. Thank you for joining us today under these unusual circumstances. We're going to try and make this remote meeting as seamless as we possibly can. My name is Nathan Screslet. I'm on the JLARC staff, and I'll be facilitating the technical side of today's meeting. Before our director, Hal Greer, goes over the agenda, I'd just like to go over a few logistical points. Firstly, we have set several different participant tiers for this meeting. You as commission members, in addition to a few of our staff and some of the VRS and VA 529 staff who are presenting today, are categorized as panelists. As panelists, you each have full participation capabilities to use video, audio, ask questions, and make comments. The second tier of participants is called attendees. Attendees can view the meeting, but cannot share audio or video. We do this in order to keep the number of simultaneous video streams as low as possible. You may note that during the JLARC staff portion of the meeting, VA 529 and VRS staff are in the attendee group. However, we will move them over into the panelist tier for their sections of the agenda. We also have a third participant tier for members of the media and the public. This meeting is being broadcast live via YouTube, and we have put the link to that in several places so people can watch and listen, but not comment. Afterwards, recordings of this meeting will be available both on the YouTube channel and on the JLARC website. You may have noticed, as you joined the meeting today, your audio was automatically placed on mute. This allows you to listen, but prevents your microphone from picking up distracting background noise that may disrupt the people who are speaking. For the benefit of all participants, please ensure that your mics are muted when not in use. However, if you happen to forget, as the session host, I'll be able to deactivate them remotely. Please note that I can deactivate mics and cameras, but I cannot reactivate them. So you'll have to do that from your keyboard. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, our speakers will pause regularly to invite questions. Simply turn on your mic, ask the chair to be recognized in order to make your question or comment, and please remember to mute when you're done. If you're using audio only and not video to join this briefing, please identify yourself before speaking so that we know who you are. If during the meeting you're having any technical issues and need help, please contact us via the methods on this slide, and we'll try and help fix your problem. Finally, thank you for your patience as we try to navigate this new way of conducting these meetings. Before I turn it over to Hal, I've been asked to do a quick roll call. This will help everyone know which members of JLARC are in the meeting before we begin. I will proceed alphabetically by last name. Do we have Delegate Austin?
Present.
All right. Delegate Carr? Delegate Carr?
Present, can you hear me?
Yes. Speaker Fillercorn?
Present.
Delegate Cox?
Here.
Delegate Herring?
Here.
Senator Howell?
Here.
Senator Locke?
Here.
Senator Normand? Didn't see Senator Normand join, so he may not be with us at the moment. Ms. Mavridis?
I am here.
Oh, good, okay.
And I'm also here.
Excellent. Senator McPike?
Here.
Delegate Orrock? I heard Delegate Orrick might not be able to join us today. Apparently not. Okay. Delegate Plum.
Here.
Delegate Sickles.
Here.
Senator Spruill. Do we have Senator Spruill?
He's here, I believe. He just-
Okay. And Delegate Torian. Okay. All right. Thank you all for doing that. Now I'm going to turn things back over to Hal to go over today's agenda.
Thank you, Nathan. The next order of business is the nomination and election of the chair and the vice chair of the commission. Past practice at JLARC has been for the chair to have a 2-year term that rotates between the Senate and the House. Senator Norman served as the chair for the last 2 years. So if the commission is to follow past practice, the chairmanship would return to the House for the next 2 years, and a senator would serve as vice chair. With that, I'd like to turn over to the members of the commission for the election of the chair and the vice chair.
It's delegate hearing. I nominate Ken Plum to chair the commission.
I will second that. Eileen Fillercorn.
How we can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Then all in favor of Delegate Plum for chair, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then Delegate Plum is the chair. I'll turn over to you, Delegate Plum.
Thank you, Hal, and thank you, members. It's an honor and a privilege to chair JLARC. I've been an admirer of JLARC from its very inception, from my beginnings in the General Assembly. It does such critically important work towards making for good government in Virginia. So thank you much for that. It's also appropriate that we have a vice chair, and that typically has come from the other house. Do I have a nomination for vice chair?
Senator Plum, this is Senator Locke.
Yes, Senator Locke.
I'd like to nominate Senator Howell.
Senator Howell has been nominated. Are there other nominations? Hearing none, all those in favor of Senator Howell as vice chair will say aye.
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 Janet, Senator Howell, it's going to be a pleasure to work with you again. You have received in advance, as is the case with JLARC meetings, the agenda as well as the background information. And so we would turn now to the JLARC staff for our orientation and work plan. How are you going to kick that off?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Vice Chair. Congratulations on your election. I certainly look forward to working with you in your new roles. We will now continue with our agenda, and I'd first like to give you a brief overview of it. For the new members of JLARC, the May meeting of the Commission is usually devoted to a presentation of the agency work plan for the coming year. And then the July meeting is traditionally devoted to JLARC's ongoing oversight of the Virginia Retirement System and Virginia 529. Since we didn't have a May meeting this year, we'd like to provide you this morning with an abbreviated presentation of our work plan, and then we'll move on to presentation of reports on VRS and Virginia 529. You'll hear this morning from both JLARC staff and VRS and Virginia 529 leadership, and I want to thank them for being here with us as well. But before we get to the work plan, I'd like to provide you with a short orientation on JLARC. This commission was created almost 50 years ago. At the time, good government reforms were sweeping the country. JLARC was established as the oversight arm of the General Assembly to help ensure government accountability. Through the commission's history, the General Assembly, under Democratic and Republican leadership, has been strongly committed to upholding and supporting JLARC's independent oversight function. Since its inception, there's been a clear understanding that what makes JLARC effective and of value to the General Assembly is that its work is conducted objectively and free from any political influence, and thus the information that's provided to the General Assembly can be trusted and relied upon. Over its history, JLARC legislative leadership has always placed its trust in JLARC to take on big policy issues and the most pressing questions about governmental performance, and counted on JLARC to report back with unbiased findings and constructive recommendations. The General Assembly's commitment to JLARC and the responsibility it has entrusted to it has enabled the agency over the years to attract and retain high-quality policy analysts to do the work of the agency. And as a result, we've got legislative oversight right in Virginia, when not all states have. We're in fact the national leader in program evaluation and legislative oversight. And I'll share some recent news in a few minutes that highlights this. With that, I'd like to turn to the orientation slides. We'll move to slide 3, Jason, Nathan. JLARC has 4 primary goals in performance of its work. First, to inform legislative policymaking. Second, to help ensure agency compliance with legislative intent. We direct many of our recommendations straight to programs and agencies. Third, to identify ways to improve government efficiency and effectiveness. And then finally, to identify ways to achieve cost savings. There are 4 primary means by which we achieve our goals. We conduct in-depth program and agency evaluations. We also do major policy studies on major policy issues. We conduct ongoing oversight in a variety of areas, and we conduct fiscal analysis. I'll talk for a minute about these 4 functions. The core of our work and most of our staff resources are allocated to the major studies that we conduct. There's no other entity in state government that is set up as JLARC is to conduct such broad-based and in-depth studies of agencies, programs, and policy issues. We typically conduct 5 or 6 major studies annually. Examples of recent policy studies are reviews of workers' compensation and gaming. Examples of recent program evaluations are our reviews of the foster care program and inmate health care. And examples of recent agency evaluations are our reviews of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership and the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. A typical major study takes 9 to 12 months and has 3 or 4 policy analysts who are assigned to it. Now, in addition to our major studies, over the years, we've been given responsibility to conduct ongoing oversight in a number of areas. We're required by law to conduct ongoing oversight of VITA, of VRS, and Virginia 529. JLARC is directed by statute to review on an ongoing basis the impact and effectiveness of the state's economic development incentives. And 2 years ago, the General Assembly decided that it wanted JLARC to have a more active and regular role in the review of programs within the health and human resources area, which has led to the establishment of the HHR unit within JLARC. Each fall, JLARC reports on trends in state spending. And during the session, we conduct fiscal impact reviews of bills upon the request of a committee chair, which in essence is a second opinion on the initial fiscal impact statement. Today's meeting will give you a window into JLARC's ongoing oversight as we provide reports on VRS and Virginia 529. So to sum up, Mr. Chairman, JLARC's value to this commission and the broader General Assembly. JLARC is uniquely positioned to conduct in-depth original research. We have policy analysts with extensive training and experience, a rigorous research process that's been developed and improved over many years. And as I mentioned earlier, we are objective and nonpartisan in our work. Given this, we can effectively help you to identify and address under or poor performance in complex state programs and agencies and provide recommendations for how to address it. And when the General Assembly is faced with major policy challenges or is considering potential major policy changes, we can provide the full range of considerations, implications, and options. I want to talk now just for a minute about your role as commission members in the JLARC process. There are 3 basic phases to the process. And in 2 of the 3 phases, the commission has the lead role. The commission has a primary responsibility for selecting study topics. And because there's typically more demand for than capacity to conduct studies, I'd encourage full consideration of which studies are your highest priorities and will be of most value to the commission and to the broader General Assembly. The second phase is the research phase, which staff conduct independently. And then, of course, the final phase is legislative follow-through, in which members of this commission or the broader General Assembly develop legislation based on JLARC recommendations. The follow-through on recommendations by members of the General Assembly has been outstanding in recent years. We'll do our best to continue to deliver reports and recommendations that you conclude warrant continued legislative follow-through. And we're always available to assist with this as needed. I would like to talk a minute about how the commission has traditionally operated. Of course, it is certainly your prerogative to modify the operational practices moving forward. Historically, the commission has met monthly from May through December, except the month of August. The typical practice has been for staff to present summary findings and recommendations to the commission as we complete the studies. And then members have the opportunity to ask questions or discuss the findings and recommendations at the meetings. And then the membership will vote to receive each report. This vote merely has been the act of agreeing to the report's publication. The vote to receive has not been an endorsement of the findings or recommendations or a vote to approve them. Of course, we certainly hope that you'll conclude that our findings are supported by the research and that our recommendations do make sense. One final point. Today's meeting and previous July meetings are not typical of JLARC meetings because instead of the emphasis on presentation of study findings by JLARC staff, we have reserved most of this meeting to hear from VRS and Virginia 529 staff. I'd like to talk briefly about access to our reports. In addition to the staff presentation of the study findings and recommendations at the JLARC meetings, we present the results of our reviews in a full report, which provides more context and background and a full discussion of the findings. And along with each report, we also prepare a 3 to 4 page summary that captures the key findings and recommendations. We know that in many instances, you will not have time to read our reports from cover to cover, although we certainly hope that you will when time permits. But I would like to point out that we try to structure them in a way that you can easily find a section that covers an issue of particular interest to you. You can access reports a variety of different ways. We make reports available in hard copy and electronically, and we'll provide them to you in both forms. And all of our reports are available online on our website. The online reports, which date back 40 years, can be a useful resource if you're trying to learn more about a particular program or agency, because there's a good chance we've reviewed it at some point. I want to say a few words about the Auditor of Public Accounts, Martha Mavridis, who's attending this meeting. The auditor and her staff reside in the legislative branch and are responsible for conducting financial audits of executive and judicial branch, as well as independent agencies. The auditor serves as an ex officio member of JLARC. The APA presents its work plan for the year each spring to JLARC. And because we didn't have a May meeting this year, Martha provided her work plan to you by email last week. On occasion, the APA will seek the Commission's approval to conduct special projects, which typically are a cross-agency review of a particular financial topic, like travel costs or small purchase charge cards. There's strong collaboration and coordination between the APA and JLARC staffs, and APA's work is often a valuable resource to JLARC staff as we conduct our work. And finally, Mr. Chairman, the newly constituted commission, I believe, provides an opportunity to continue to raise the standard of excellence at JLARC. As I've already touched on, it is my opinion that the commission is functioning well. Nathan, next slide, please. This is highlighted by the recognition that we received last month. JLARC received the Excellence in Evaluation Award from the National Legislative Program Evaluation Society, which is a section of NCSL. The award is presented to a legislative agency that has made significant contribution to the fields of program evaluation or performance auditing for the previous 4-year period. This is a prestigious award in our field. This award is a credit to the staff of JLARC, but it's also the credit to the members of this commission as well as the broader General Assembly. But even with the success of the agency, we view the change in membership of the commission as an opportunity to further raise the standard of excellence at JLARC. We're continually seeking ways to improve our processes and our work products to better support you in your role and welcome your participation in how to further improve in areas such as the staff contribution to the study selection process, recruiting a more diverse staff, report content and format, and communication with members. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my orientation remarks. And in closing, JLARC staff very much looks forward to working with you. And anytime you have a question or concern, please don't hesitate to call me, to text me, or email me. I'm going to make sure that all of you have my mobile number. With that, I will pause for any questions, basic questions about JLARC, basic questions about how we're going to proceed, or about my remarks.
Wow, thank you very much for that overview. I know that's very helpful for new members and a refresher for us old members. And I think we all heard the message about the integrity of JLARC and how important it is that we protect that. So we respect that certainly. Your recent award from a national group reinforces what we've come to believe here in Virginia, and that's about the professionalism of your work and the success that you've had with that. So congratulations. Are there questions of how from the members? Unmute yourself. And hearing no questions or comments, then we will move forward with the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think that the next on the agenda will be an abbreviated presentation of our work plan. And this is the work that we're currently undertaking and plan to present to you this year. I I'm pleased to report that despite the challenges present this year, we're on schedule to complete all the planned work on time. It's a tribute to the commitment, resourcefulness, and perseverance of the JLARC staff. It's also credit to the many stakeholders that have been flexible, cooperative, and available to our staff. Our 3 associate directors will now briefly describe for you the studies under their guidance and supervision. And first up will be Senior Associate Director Justin Brown, followed by Associate Directors Tracy Smith and Kimberly Sarte. Justin?
Thank you, Hal. Just want to take a few minutes to give you an overview of the 3 studies I'll be supervising this year. The first one, if we can go to slide 15, Nathan, will be a review of the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity. And we'll be releasing that at our September JLARC meeting. We're doing a variety of things, but we're really taking a look at each of the agency's major program areas. And chief among these are its program to certify businesses as either meeting the state's small business definition or meeting some other categories such as being women or minority owned. Another topic we'll address that I'd briefly highlight, which is a little separate from SBSD itself, is we're reviewing how the state's small business definition compares to definitions used by other states. In October, we'll release a review of the Virginia Department of Education. And to oversimplify it tremendously, DOE does basically 2 types of things. The first is ensuring that school divisions comply with the relevant federal and state laws. And the second is a variety of support type activities, especially things like providing technical assistance to school divisions. For these 2 types of categories, we're collecting information from DOE itself and school divisions to determine how well DOE fulfills its role. You can see it from the slide. We're also looking into how well DOE coordinates with other state agencies and the effectiveness of DOE's relationship with the Board of Education. And again, that'll come out in October. The last study I'm supervising, Mr. Chairman, is a little bit different. It's a prospective policy review of legalizing marijuana in the Commonwealth, and that is something we'll release at the November JLARC meeting. Our goal on this is to provide several options for the General Assembly to consider that would address things like the commercial structure, the regulatory approach, and the administrative structure the state could use if it chooses to legalize marijuana. Along with that, we'll develop some potential taxation approaches and estimate how much revenue legalization could potentially produce for the Commonwealth. And I would close with the final really important piece of this, which is understanding how prohibition has disproportionately harmed certain groups, especially Black citizens in certain parts of the state. A major focus of the joint resolution directing this work asks us to define the negative effects of prohibition, and then also come up with some ways that Virginia could, through how it chooses to legalize, redress those negative impacts. This could be through things like preferences for affected individuals or communities in the commercial licensing process, and or through earmarking revenue from marijuana sales to programs that help these affected communities. Mr. Chairman, before I turn it over to my colleague Tracy to talk about her studies, I'll just pause here for a moment to see if there's any questions or comments before we proceed.
Mr. Chairman, Justin, this is Eileen Fillercorn. So I understand that all of these studies have been going on for a while. You've been working on these for several months now. And obviously, at first, just when you started sharing about the small business and supplier diversity, even before you got to the other ones, education and marijuana, quite clearly there's been issues and things that have arisen that would probably need further review since you all began the study and put together and first established the study team. So when did you begin, and how relevant will it be, and how are you incorporating what's going on today into these studies that have already been ongoing for several months?
Those are good questions. I think, as you say, the kind of rate of change in certain areas of government has been fairly unprecedented over the last 3-4 months. We started on the small business in the education study in and around the time of the legislative session. And so the way our process works is we take the study mandate as it's written and then kind of proceed with that. But we also do a fairly comprehensive kind of stakeholder interview process and looking at some of the issues that are unfolding. So to give you an example of that, it's become pretty clear that some of the things that the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity does will probably be even more important moving forward, given what's happened to small businesses. So we have kind of given additional emphasis to the types of programs that agency is offering and providing. And I think some of the things that we'll have in that report will really provide a good lens moving forward in terms of how that agency needs to reflect what's happened to the small business community out in the economy in terms of how difficult things have become. The other, not to go on too long, but the other thing I would just say is that with respect to the Department of Education, we have kind of taken two tactics. One is we frankly wanted to be mindful, Madam Speaker, of the fact that school divisions in particular were having a very difficult time kind of adapting to this. So for a part of our study, we kind of didn't bother them, frankly, and we are now circling back and trying to do some of that. But we have also kind of cataloged the things that the Department of Education has done to provide guidance to school divisions as they kind of navigate this pandemic. My guess is, though, I guess just to wrap up, there will probably be some things moving forward after we finish our review that might need to be contemplated by the department in terms of this ongoing pandemic issue and how that's affecting schools.
Other questions? If not, let's go forward.
All right, I think I'm up. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I have two major studies that are under my supervision this year. The first is the Children's Services Act, or CSA program, which we will brief to you all in November. And the second is a comprehensive study of K-12 special education, which we will wrap up in December. Turning first on slide 19 to the CSA program. CSA was created in 1993 to serve Virginia's at-risk children through a centralized, sum-sufficient funding model. Over 15,000 children receive CSA-funded services, and the majority of those children are either in foster care or they're receiving services to prevent them from entering foster care. Another 25% of children in CSA are receiving CSA-funded special education services by virtue of the fact that they are placed in private special education day schools. The CSA program has been on the General Assembly's radar for the past several years due to increasing program costs. In FY19, over $400 million in state and local funds were spent on the program. And even though the number of children in the CSA program has remained stable, program expenditures have been increasing by about 4% per year. And so spending growth is certainly a key topic that the study will address. And the team is also examining the growth in the number of CSA children who are placed in private special education day schools to determine whether growth in those placements is in fact contributing to overall program spending increases. And our study will also look at how well the program is operating at both the state and the local levels. And we'll be examining whether children are ultimately experiencing positive outcomes as a result of receiving services through the CSA program. The second study under my supervision, Mr. Chairman, is our comprehensive review of the delivery of K-12 special education services to Virginia students. Approximately 13% of Virginia students receive special education services, and spending on special education represents about 16% of total K-12 education spending. Two key topics for this study include whether Virginia's school divisions are accurately identifying students who may be eligible for special education services, and then once they're identified, whether their education plans, also known as IEPs, are well designed and then well implemented. We will also be looking at the availability and expertise of special education staff, including teachers, support professionals, and also building administrators. The team is also examining how well school divisions are integrating special education students into general education classrooms and other activities, and how students are performing academically over time. Finally, Mr. Chairman, we'll be evaluating VDOE's performance in monitoring and overseeing school divisions' delivery of special education services. As you may know, the U.S. Department of Education has recently raised concerns about how Virginia handles complaints about special education services and oversees special education generally. And we are covering those important topics in our review as well. So Mr. Chairman, those are the two major studies under my supervision this year. I'll pause for a minute. If you all have any questions about those two, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Mr. Chairman, this is Delegate Sickles here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask her on the CSA program, are you going to look into the relationship with the students that qualify for Medicaid and are getting other services in Medicaid and try to define a little bit more clearly which students are eligible for CSA and what alternatives they may have? So I think it's confusing to a lot of people, all the different programs that we have for disabled students, but how they work together.
That's a great question. Yes, all of the different funding streams that are involved in the CSA program can certainly be, there is incredibly complex. There is this one pool of funds, but in addition to the pool of funds, you have federal funds, Medicaid funds, Title IV-E funds for foster care. And so one of the tasks that the team has before it is to really understand how those funding streams work together. And then from a consumer's perspective, what services they may be able to access through these different funding sources. And I think kind of a perennial question for the CSA program is to what extent Medicaid funds are used prior to using CSA funds. And so I think that is a really good question. I think it's important for the General Assembly certainly to understand how those funding streams work together, but also for the individual consumers and case managers themselves. So we're definitely looking at how Medicaid funding is involved in this.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. Almost all of our Medicaid recipients are in managed care now, and the managed care companies are, to use a colloquial term, clamping down on some of the expenditures that have been made. There's a lot of angst out there in the provider community about therapeutic programs that have been used in the past, Medicaid programs that are not being used now. And one of the reasons that DMAS likes this, they think they're doing a good job. One of the reasons is that there are other programs that may be better, including just good school counselor at the lower level end of it. So since Medicaid is 100% funded outside the school system, there are school systems that use it very frequently, and some that don't use it very much at all, but it's being controlled now by managed care organizations that are going to have an impact, or at least maybe, an indirect impact or bank shot impact on CSA, potentially. So looking at the role of managed care organizations in the implementation of all these programs is my point.
We can certainly do that. Absolutely.
Thanks. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Over.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, we have one more overview report, I believe.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kimberly Sarte, and major work under my supervision this year falls under the ongoing oversight categories and includes the VRS and Virginia 529 oversight reports, which we will be presenting to you in a few minutes, a review of the state's regional and infrastructure economic development incentives, and a review of the Virginia Information Technologies Agency, or VITA. Moving to slide 22. JLARC evaluates the state's economic development incentives on an ongoing basis. And as part of this effort, each year we conduct an in-depth evaluation of a subset of incentives. This year's in-depth evaluation will cover the state's regional and infrastructure incentives and will include 4 regional grants benefiting either the tobacco region or enterprise zones, 4 grants designed to enhance infrastructure, such as roads and industrial sites, and the state's 2 coal tax credits. These incentives will be reviewed for their effectiveness in achieving their goals, such as job creation, and their economic impact. And this report will be presented to you in September. As part of JLARC's ongoing oversight of VITA, we are conducting an in-depth review of VITA's new multi-supplier IT service model. This is actually a follow-up to a study we conducted last year on VITA's new model, which was implemented starting in 2018. Last year's study found that implementation of the model was significantly behind schedule and performance improvements were needed. At the conclusion of last year's study, JLARC directed us to conduct this follow-up study to report on VITA's progress. This year's study will assess the implementation status of the model, the management of the model and the contracts with IT suppliers, the quality of IT services provided to state agencies such as email, servers, and laptops, and the resolution of service incidents, and whether VITA is appropriately organized to manage and operate the model. And this report will be presented to you in October. And Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to pause there for any questions, or if not, turn the presentation back over to Hal.
Questions from the commission? Hal, it's an ambitious work plan you've got there and some really significant reports coming to us in the next couple of months. You want to go ahead with our report for today?
Sure, it is indeed. Dr. Plum, I just thought I would just make a couple of more comments about the schedule. If this shows, the next slide shows some additional reports that will be presented in 2020. They're not in the major category, but we'll also be reporting on these items. I won't go through them at this point. And then the next slide shows our proposed meeting schedule, and it shows the major studies when we have proposed to present them. You see we've got 4 more meetings for the year scheduled. We think 4 meetings would allow us to present the major studies to you. We've got some tentative dates, as you'll see on slide 25, and certainly, we'll work with you, Mr. Chairman, if there are other dates that work better, but these dates we put as placeholder dates and think they may make sense when we look at the other meetings that are scheduled, and we try to avoid conflicts with other meetings. So those are proposed dates for presenting this work in the fall. And then one final thing I would mention, I think my understanding is that there is a desire to have a topic selection subcommittee that will proceed with deciding what future topics we take on. And my understanding is that the commission will begin to try to select a membership to that soon. And I think ideally it'd be great if that subcommittee can meet before the September meeting of JLARC, but that'll certainly be up to the commission.
Thank you, Hal. And the intention is that by the September meeting, certainly our topic selection committee will be hard at work. I'll work with Senator Howell and the House and Senate leadership to get that group identified. The fact of the matter is we're so popular and our demand on our time is so great that somebody's got to prioritize this stuff and sort it out. And so we will have that done for the September meeting. Thank you.
Very, very good. I think now is the time that if there are no more further questions about the work plan, we'll move on to the next topic of the day, which is VRS. And I'd like to turn it back over to Kimberly Sarte, who oversees this work. Kimberly?
Thank you, Hal. Let me just get my... see here. My apologies. Okay, there we go. And here we go. All right. Mr. Chairman, as Hal mentioned, the rest of today's meeting is devoted to JLARC's ongoing oversight of VRS and Virginia 529. To start, I thought it would be helpful for the new members to briefly explain why JLARC has ongoing oversight of these 2 agencies. JLARC's oversight of VRS stems from several important reports JLARC released in the early 1990s, which recommended changes to VRS's governance structure and investment practices. These reports led to the governance structure that is largely in place today, and they also led to the VRS Oversight Act, which was passed by the General Assembly in 1994 and gave JLARC ongoing oversight of VRS. JLARC's oversight of Virginia 529 stems from a recommendation coming out of the 2011 Governor's Commission on Government Reform and Restructuring. The College Savings Plan Oversight Act, which was passed by the General Assembly in 2012, again gave JLARC ongoing oversight of Virginia 529. These 2 acts require JLARC to provide regular reports on VRS and Virginia 529. JLARC provides 2 oversight reports on VRS each year, one in July and one in December. And we provide 1 report every other year on Virginia 529. Today, I will be giving you a brief presentation on our July semi-annual VRS Oversight Report. After my presentation, VRS will provide you with their annual status report. First, the board chair, O'Kelly McWilliams, will provide some opening remarks. Next, you will hear from Ron Schmitz, the Chief Investment Officer, and then Trish Bishop, VRS's Director. After that, Jamie Bitts will give you a presentation on JLARC's biennial Virginia 529 Oversight Report. And some of you will recognize Jamie as he has been a project leader here at JLARC for 7 years and has presented to you many times. We are pleased that Jamie recently agreed to take on the role as Chief Oversight Analyst and will now be focusing on JLARC's oversight responsibilities. After Jamie, you will receive Virginia 529's annual status report from the agency's CEO, Mary Morris, and the Investment Director, Michael Wynn. So getting back to the presentation of the VRS Oversight Report, which you see on your screen and which I will walk you through now. As I said, this report is required by the VRS Oversight Act. The other requirements of the Oversight Act are listed here. Today, I will be covering the VRS Trust Fund investments, the defined contribution plans, and the hybrid plan. A core responsibility of VRS is managing the investment assets in the VRS Trust Fund. This is important because the assets used to pay VRS benefits are pooled in the trust fund. These benefits include retirement benefits for state employees, teachers, and local government employees, as well as other benefit programs. In total, VRS serves approximately 743,000 members, retirees, and beneficiaries. The most recent investment data available at the time we prepared this report is through March. As of March, the trust fund had achieved a negative 2.2% return for the 1-year period, in large part due to the market volatility brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. As of March, the fund held $76.9 billion in assets, which is $3.5 billion less compared to last March. Excuse me. The largest losses in terms of asset value were in the public equity and credit strategies classes. This table shows you the fund's overall performance compared to its benchmarks. As you can see, the fund has met or outperformed its benchmarks for all periods except the 1-year period. Looking to the far right of the table, you can see that the fund's 10-year and 25-year returns were above the 6.75% that VRS assumes the fund will achieve over the long term. The trust fund is a diversified portfolio with investments allocated across 7 different asset classes. They are ordered here from largest to smallest. Most asset classes met or exceeded their benchmarks for most, if not all, periods. However, public equity failed to meet its benchmarks for the 1, 3, and 5-year periods. This underperformance was largely due to value strategies underperforming during these periods. According to VRS staff, the first quarter of 2020 was one of the worst recorded quarters ever for value strategies. The board recently modified the asset class benchmarks and the staff compensation that is related to these benchmarks. Benchmarks are important because they are the standard against which investment performance is measured. VRS staff are also compensated in part based on investment performance relative to the benchmarks. If investments outperform the benchmarks, staff receive incentive compensation to recognize this outperformance. This spring, VRS had an external consultant review both the benchmarks and the outperformance of the benchmarks required for investment staff to receive incentive compensation. The consultant made several recommendations to modify the benchmarks and, in most cases, to increase the outperformance required by staff to receive incentive compensation. These recommendations were adopted by the board in June. Now I'll turn to VRS's defined contribution plans. VRS also manages defined contribution plans for state and local employees. Assets in these plans are completely separate from the VRS Trust Fund. Defined contribution plans are similar to private 401k plans or personal IRAs, where each participant owns a personal account and is responsible for choosing his or her own investments. Some plans are intended to be a primary source of retirement income, like the hybrid plan and the higher education plan. Others are intended to be supplemental income, like the deferred compensation plans used by many state employees. In total, the defined contribution plans held $4.9 billion in assets as of March 2020, and there were over 200,000 account holders. One way to evaluate the investment performance of defined contribution plans is to look at the performance of various options people can choose. As shown here, the returns for the majority of defined contribution options exceeded their benchmarks. And I want to especially point out the additional options that are available under the higher education plan. In the past, some of you may recall that these plans pretty solidly underperformed their investment benchmarks. However, the performance here reflects a new investment menu implemented by VRS in January, which is expected to result in better performance and lower fees. I'll now move on to the last section about the hybrid plan. One topic that we have routinely updated JLARC on is a voluntary contribution participation for hybrid plan members. This issue is important because by design, hybrid plan members must make voluntary contributions to the defined contribution component of their plan to achieve retirement income replacement, similar to members of VRS Plan 1 and Plan 2. Low voluntary contributions will result in lower retirement income because members are saving fewer assets and also failing to take full advantage of the employer match. The hybrid plan includes an automatic 0.5% escalation of members' voluntary contributions every 3 years, unless they are already making the maximum contribution amount of 4% or they opt out. The most recent automatic escalation occurred in January of 2020, and this resulted in the percentage of hybrid plan members making voluntary contributions to increase to a high point of nearly 90%. Although approximately half of these are only making the 0.5 contribution resulting from the escalation. Here you can see the peak and valley effect that happens with the automatic escalation. The plan's first automatic escalation was in 2017, which you can see brought the percentage of members making voluntary contributions to 79%. However, the percentage dropped in the following 2 years because new employees tend not to initiate a voluntary contribution when they join the plan. But then, the next automatic escalation occurred 3 years later in 2020, and again increased the percentage of members making voluntary contributions. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my prepared remarks, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Questions of staff? Hearing none, then let's move on to the VRS staff. And Kimberly, you want to introduce it?
Sure, yes. I'd now like to introduce Mr. O'Kelly McWilliams, who is the chairman of the VRS Board of Trustees.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'm O'Kelly E. McWilliams III, and it's an honor to be with you today to brief you on the Virginia retirement system. As the new chairman of the VRS Board of Trustees, I would take a moment to share a little bit about my background. I'm proud to have attended Richmond Public Schools from elementary school through high school graduation. I then attended Longwood University, followed by law school at George Mason University, where I received my Juris Doctor. I clerked for 2 years for a state court judge in Fairfax County and have also served in leadership capacities with the Virginia State Bar. Now, as a member at the law firm of Mintz Levitt in in DC, I advise U.S. and international clients on a wide range of business, governance, and employment law issues. Appointed to the VRS Board of Trustees in 2017, I've served on several board committees before the governor appointed me chairman in February. Like many of you, I have several family members who are VRS members. It is also a privilege to serve them, as well as all the VRS members, retirees, and beneficiaries while leading the system during these very challenging times. So let me begin with an update on the current status of the board and system. Next slide, please. As you review the list of board members on this slide, you will notice one new board member has been appointed since we last met. William A. Garrett, who served as fire chief of the Winchester Fire and Rescue Department, joined the board earlier this year to fill the local government employee seat. Next slide, please. With almost 743,000 active and retired members, VRS is now the 18th largest pension system in the United States and the 41st largest public or private system in the world. Without a doubt, this year has brought new challenges our way, but let me assure you and our members that VRS remains undeterred in its mission to deliver retirement services and benefits to Virginia's public employees through sound financial stewardship and superior customer service. In fact, the agency was well positioned for the transition to remote work. We engaged in planning efforts several years ago that prepared employees and mobilized necessary resources for an event such as this, making it a seamless shift to the new customer service delivery paradigm for the agency, its employees and members. VRS continues to pay beneficiaries on time. We process retirements, council members, and retirees, process contributions from over 800 employers, and manage the investment program, all from remote locations without missing a beat. Next slide, please. VRS Director Trish Bishop will share more details about the VRS administration. However, I'd like to note a few highlights. In January, hybrid plan members who were not making the maximum voluntary contribution were auto-escalated by 0.5%. Only about 1% of hybrid members opted out of increasing their contributions to their retirement plan. So we have more members saving more for their future. My VRS financial wellness has taken on a new level of meaning during the current pandemic. VRS nationally recognized award-winning program has proven nimble during the economic crisis by serving up fresh articles and information to members on budgeting, managed credit cards and debt, and other money management issues, particularly important during the COVID-19 crisis. In addition, we continue to progress on our efforts to make online retirement possible for all of our members. As we read the daily headlines, we're acutely aware of the impact of COVID-19 on our economy. Our investments team, led by Chief Investment Officer Ron Schmidt, has been closely monitoring global financial markets and has helped well position the portfolio to respond to these conditions. We're keenly aware that about 2/3 of the retirement benefit is generated through investment income. VRS investment professionals have provided an average annual added value of $225 million net of all fees and incentive payments per year, above the VRS board policy benchmark. This has resulted in about $2.3 billion additional dollars to the fund over the past 10 years. Although Ron will provide more detail later, I'm pleased to say that we have a positive return in a year of unprecedented economic crisis. While we wait for the final tabulation, preliminary figures indicate that the fiscal year performance will be approximately 2%, with an approximate ending balance of $82 billion. Again, I caution that these are preliminary numbers and we await final tabulation of all portfolio data. Before I close, I want to acknowledge that our agency, our state, and our nation are experiencing obvious stress from the challenging economic conditions that accompany the current pandemic. At the same time, we're grappling with issues surrounding race, ethnicity, and social justice. These issues clearly affect the economy and our workplaces as well. As an agency that employs a diverse team, which serves diverse members and retirees across the Commonwealth, VRS is not immune to these issues. Recognizing the need to leverage the strength found in our differences, VRS formalized its diversity and inclusion activities in 2008 with the creation of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. The committee opened the conversation of race, ethnicity, religion, and gender by presenting programs and engaging employees in discussions. In the last year, the committee has sponsored a variety of events that have increased awareness of culture, race, and ethnicity. In the coming year, the committee will look at answering more strategic questions that will guide our diversity and inclusion efforts in our workplace. Also, VRS has a long history of engagement and investment with diverse investment managers. We believe that inclusion of women and minority managers has the potential to enhance the overall returns generated by VRS's portfolio. VRS staff focus attention on investment opportunities with these firms and engage with them in a variety of ways. In closing, I want to thank you and your General Assembly colleagues for your support of and commitment to fully funding VRS contribution rates. In fact, your efforts have been instrumental in improving the overall funded status over the retirement plans over the last 5 years. Your continued support enhances the financial well-being of the Commonwealth's public employees and positions of retirement plan to be viable well into the future. Not only has your support strengthened the system and aligned it with the standards of the Government Finance Officers Association, but your commitment to funding also has enabled Virginia to share a positive approach to pension funding with the bond rating agencies, contributing to the state retaining its AAA bond rating status. On behalf of the VRS Board of Trustees, thank you for your commitment and support of the retirement plans and other benefits administered by VRS for the Commonwealth's public servant. I appreciate this opportunity to address their commission. Now, CIO Ron Schmidt will provide an overview of the investment program, followed by VRS Director Trish Bishop, who will provide information about the benefit administration. Ron?
There we go. Sorry. I thought, I didn't know I could mute and unmute myself. I thought it had to be done by central command. Thanks, O'Kelly. Good morning, Mr. Chair and all commission members. I'm happy to be here, at least virtually, to present the VRS annual investment report. The past year, as noted, has been quite a roller coaster ride, down 35% or so in the March period, and then subsequent to that, up, recovering the equity markets anyway, recovering much of those losses in April and May. I'm happy to report that the investment team has continued to add value to the board's benchmarks over longer term horizons. There we go. Sorry, I didn't know I could control that either. I'm not just a name, a voice out of the ether. At any rate, VRS staff has been able to add value over the board's benchmarks over longer term horizons. However, the past couple of years has been challenging, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the performance update to follow. Next slide, please. This slide is just an outline of the topics that I traditionally address with JLARC every year. This year will be just very much the same, and we'll do so, however, in slightly abbreviated form as our time is a little shorter than what we've been granted in the past. Next slide, please. This is a bar graph that I show you every year. It's the annual returns, fiscal year returns since 1990. For 2020, we use the fiscal year to date numbers through March. As you can see, the annual performance can be quite variable, generating returns anywhere from a positive 20 or so percent in one year to minus 20% in some other years. I wanted to note that the assumed rate of return that O'Kelly referenced earlier and is shown here by the light green line is a longer term average result of the past history and tempered by future as well as short-term expectations, future long-term expectations as well as short-term expectations. Next slide, please. JLARC staff already mentioned returns through March 31, so I'll just take a moment to add a little bit of color. The most impactful area of difficulty in the short term has been public equities. Our equity portfolio strategy is based on long-standing academic and practitioner research that suggests there's positive payoffs to certain factors in the equity markets. Those factors are value, momentum, and quality. The value factor, as Kimberly alluded, has been significantly underperforming in the past couple of years. And I would note that similar underperformance cycles have occurred in the past, for example, during the tech bubble in the late 1990s, and they tend to self-correct in time. In fact, the rebound after periods of underperformance like this is usually quite robust and patience is rewarded, and we remain committed to the factors that have led to our long-term success. Next slide, please. I don't normally talk to JLARC about peer data, what our peers are doing and how we compare to peers because the board and staff is more focused on our portfolio returns versus our benchmarks. But given that the shorter term numbers have been a little bit less favorable than our longer term history, I did want to illustrate that the portfolio is still delivering good value and solid results. This slide, collected by the largest custodian banks in the US, shows that VRS has achieved better than median returns over the last 5 years while employing less than median risk. And that's shown by they're in the upper left quadrant, shown by the arrow there with the circle. Next slide, please. Slide 12 contains updated numbers for April. Normally, we would have a slide here for May, but since this meeting is a little earlier in July than normal, we don't have final May numbers yet. So I won't really talk much about this slide. I will talk a little bit about our May estimates and our a little bit tougher to estimate June numbers that O'Kelly referenced a little bit earlier in his remarks. The total fund is right at its benchmark in April, and the not quite final May numbers were actually well above benchmark. As you recall from the March slide, total fund return was negative 2.2% for the prior 12 months, which is about 80 basis points below benchmark. And that reflects some difficulties during that March sell-off at the start of the pandemic and the economic consequences that it was expected to generate. By May, we're now showing a positive 5.5% one-year return. That's a 12-month return in May. And the relative performance is positive by 90 basis points, almost 1%. So the turnaround just from March to April has been really extraordinary. And we're pleased to see that rebound after a pretty disappointing and rugged month of March. For the June number, we drop off a favorable return from last June and add this June's estimated numbers. While we have a pretty good feel for public market data, we don't have private market returns yet, but because those returns marks are done on a 3-month lag, we will be showing March 31 values for our private market assets, and that'll tend to dampen the return estimated at June fiscal year to date. And as Kelly mentioned, that's about 2% is our best estimate at this point for the fiscal year. Next slide, please. This is a table that looks at the longer term results. The slides before were concentrated on 1, 3, 5, and 10 years. This adds 15, 20, and 25 years for the total fund. Doesn't break it out by asset class. But you can see that the annual returns over time bounce around quite a bit relative to the assumed rate of return of 675. But what's really critical to me as CIO and to the board in its oversight of the investment process is that the solid consistency of the value add from the portfolio comparison to the benchmark over those longer term periods. Excess returns at different points beyond 5 years range from positive 20 basis points to a positive 50 basis points. This is consistent with the goals and the risk parameters set for staff by the board, and the 50 basis points excess return over 25 years means that the Commonwealth has saved approximately 5 to 7% of its expected pension costs due solely to the performance of the investment portfolio versus a passive implementation of the policy risk profile adopted by the board. And we're quite pleased with those results. Next slide, please. Let's shift now from performance to asset allocation and risk positioning. The asset mix at March 31 is shown here in pie chart form. This allocation is quite similar to the way we're positioned today. All of our asset class positions are within the policy ranges adopted by the board, and the risk parameters in terms of volatility and statistical variation from policy are well within board approved levels as well. Next slide, please. Kimberly mentioned in April that the board adopted a new policy portfolio. It's shown here in the middle column, the fiscal 2021 column in the middle. This policy is a phase-in step toward the long-term targets, which are shown on the right-hand side of the page in the right-hand column. You can see that the move from 2020 to the long-term policy, and if you went back before 2020, it's more of the same. We've been shifting from public market assets, public equity in particular, to more private assets, real estate, private equity. The policy targets are results of a month-long asset liability study conducted by a third-party investment consultant. Besides validating the previous studies that were done in 2013 and 16, the new study's mission selected to increase private market exposure and by elevating some long-term exposure to multi-asset strategies in both public and private space. Those are shown by the acronyms PIP and MAPS at the bottom of the left-hand side of the asset classes. Next slide, please. Adding value to the total fund is something that we discuss with you every year, primarily historically about the internal portfolio, but in more recent years I've added what the external management team does as well. We'll talk about both of those in some brief detail. Next slide, please. This slide shows the various equity and fixed income mandates that are managed by VRS staff in-house and complements what we do through our external firms and external partnerships. As you know, there's been a steady increase in assets managed by staff versus being shipped outside to external organizations, going from about 5% of the fund 25 years ago to 35% of the fund today. Next slide, please. This table shows the composite return of the in-house equity and fixed income teams. The excess return figures are highlighted in yellow. Both stock and bond portfolios have targeted return premiums to the index of 20 to 30 basis points, and performance has been better than expected over the long time periods. As mentioned earlier, the recent 2 years or so have been a difficult period for our investment strategies in the equity markets. These short-term impacts have cut into the gains of the longer-term track record. And as mentioned earlier, it's normal to have periods of over and underperformance in the intermediate term. And in fact, a few years ago, I commented to this body that our numbers were better than expected at the time, and that there would likely be a swing in the pendulum to where we would have some performance difficulties just owing to the natural ebb and flow of the markets. And indeed, that future is here. But to be consistent with what I said a few years ago, I'll say the flip side of that now. This is a cyclical phenomenon with the value factor that we rely on ebbing in and out of favor over time. And it's something that we strongly feel will rebound in the future, and in fact has started to rebound a little bit in the last 3 or 4 months in fits and starts. With respect to the core bond portfolio, all time periods shown have excess returns, and indeed the fixed income team has shown remarkable consistency in adding value over the index. I'm just ad-libbing here a little bit, but their monthly outperformance to the positive is something like 80% every month they outperform. It's really been a remarkable track record. Next slide, please. There are several key advantages to the Commonwealth of having a skilled investment team of in-house portfolio managers. 2 are very direct and we discuss here. First is the excess performance over the benchmark, and second is fee savings. Last year, we reported in our annual letter to the governor and the legislature that the aggregate value added by in-house management to the total fund from excess performance over 10 years was approximately $820 million, or $82 million a year. In addition, independent survey data from an outfit called Cost Effectiveness Measurement Service shows that the in-house staff management saved approximately $58 million in fees that would have otherwise been paid to outside external firms. We continue to explore additional ways to create cost efficiency through expanding the in-house operation. Next slide, please. Staff dealing with external managers also generated excess performance over the benchmark, approximately $1.4 billion over the past 10 years, or a little above $140 million a year on average. The team's a significant contributor to VRS's cost-effective operation. For example, the portfolio or the public equity strategy manages about 10% of its assets in what are called co-investments, which have no fees and no profit sharing. The real assets and credit teams have also growing exposure to co-investments as well. CEM, the service I referenced earlier, has shown that our team operates at a fee level below that of our peers when adjusting for similar asset class exposures. First, VRS minimizes fund-of-funds arrangements, and CEM estimates that saves VRS about $15 million a year compared to our peers solely on the way we implement our external strategies. Second, just plain tough negotiating results in a savings of about $25 million a year in fees paid by our peers for similar services. And again, this is data generated by CEM, an outside service. Next slide, please. This is a graph from CEM, the external service vendor that I mentioned, and it shows investment management returns and costs of US public funds. The gray dots are the large public fund peers of VRS, and the lighter colored dots are other public funds, not specific to VRS's peer group. The crosshairs in the graph reflect the median point of value-added investment performance and cost structure. Basically, any observation above the horizontal line reflects higher than peer group value add in terms of investment return, and any observation to the left of the vertical line indicates lower costs than peers. And you can see from the arrow and the gold triangle, VRS is in what we call the sweet spot, low cost and high value add. Next slide, please. Last, with your indulgence, I was going to spend a little time talking about the COVID pandemic and the expected economic impacts of that. But we found our time in front of you was a little shorter than it is in normal years. So I'm going to cover a couple of slides closely or very quickly and just go to kind of the punchline slide at the end. This slide I just wanted to highlight. On the left side is a table by the International Monetary Fund. It shows economic projections for 2020 and 2021 by trade area. You can see the decline in 2020 from COVID and the expected recovery in 2021. Next slide, please. This slide simply discusses the various US reactions to the COVID and the shutdowns and the lockdowns that we experienced almost nationwide. It shows various Federal Reserve and executive, legislative, fiscal stimulus programs, and they've been significant to date, but I think more is going to be needed, and that's a pretty strong consensus within the investment industry. Next slide, please. Just a few of the takeaways then from where we are today. We do expect global growth to be truncated for the current calendar year due to the pandemic. The degree of long-term impact is still an issue for debate. Most analysts seem to see a recovery in 2021, but those expectations are going from a sharp V-shaped recovery to something that more resembles what's been termed the Nike swoosh. So a longer, more extended recovery and perhaps not quite as sharp. And you're seeing a little bit of that now as some of the states that opened up early are starting to restrict activities a little bit. Positive items in the economy include quick and strong action by the Fed and other central banks to ensure adequate liquidity and proper functioning of credit markets. The fiscal stimulus negotiated between the executive and legislative branches, and it have been offered by other economic regions, has been very beneficial. And again, as I mentioned, I think more will be needed. There are many indicators, however, that have negative implications. And these include trade tensions with China, expensive markets, particularly in the private assets, an area where we're trying to grow the portfolio over time. And last, a stock market that's recovered very sharply in April and May, much faster than the underlying economy. And that causes us a little bit of concern as well. All in all, we're positioned a little bit defensively versus our long-term policy targets. That said, we tend not to make large market timing bets, so we don't significantly deviate from policy benchmark weights. We prefer instead to shift strategies within asset classes where we see opportunities rather than across asset classes. So this concludes my formal comments. I'd be happy to take any questions or respond to any comments that any of the JLARC Commission members may have.
It might be advisable that we go ahead and have your director, Trish Bishop, to go ahead and present, and then we'll go for a discussion. Trish, are you there?
Sure. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. I'm Trish Bishop, Director of the Virginia Retirement System. Thank you for the opportunity to provide a brief update regarding VRS. Next slide. This membership slide provides a breakdown of the nearly 743,000 members we serve. The largest member group is our teacher group, which constitutes about 156,000 active members, followed by our political subdivision employees and then state employees. Essentially, Plan 1 and Plan 2 are closed to new members with the exception of employees who are in hazardous duty positions. The hybrid retirement plan is the plan for most of our new members, again, except those with hazardous duty benefits, and it's growing quickly, and it composes about 1/3 of the total VRS active member population. Just as a reminder, the hybrid plan consists of 2 components, a defined benefit component, which is generally referred to as a pension plan and provides a monthly lifetime benefit based on a formula, and a defined contribution component, which is similar to a private sector 401k style plan. Next slide, please. As we look more closely at the hybrid retirement plan, you'll see that the plan employs a shared risk model between the employer and employee. Also, the plan lowers the future cost of the plans, and finally provides increased portability for our members. Next slide. Current circumstances have provided VRS with new opportunities to shift to new channels for service delivery. Next slide. To that end, our VRS, so we've moved nimbly to working from home. We've been able to process retirements. We have been able to manage the investment program, and we've been able to conduct outreach and support through technology. Next slide. Our MyVRS Financial Wellness Program has taken on a new level of meaning and proven nimble during the current pandemic. For example, we provided a new digital guide called Coronavirus and Your Financial Health, which features answers, tips, and tools to help members stay financially well during this uncertain time. Next slide. In addition, our nationally recognized MyVRS Financial Wellness Program features courses, tools, educational games, and calculators to help members gain an edge in planning for their future. Members are using these resources as demonstrated by almost 100,000 page views of the financial wellness screens. Next slide. The hybrid plan is growing steadily with about 120,000 active members. Most hybrid plan members are new to their positions and have an average tenure of just over 2 years. While we continue to focus on encouraging hybrid plan members to save by making voluntary contributions to the plan, we're pleased that of those who are making voluntary contributions, 85% are making the maximum 4%. The takeaway here is that once members get hooked on saving, they're making the maximum contribution. Our charge then is to help all participants learn about the importance and benefits of saving and making it easy for them to save. Next slide. As Kimberly shared, one way the plan encourages savings is through auto escalation. And the good news is that only about 1% of the impacted population opted out of auto escalation, which is even better than our opt-out rate from 2017. Overall, the low opt-out rate is a great outcome for members who are saving more and boosting their savings through the employer match. Next slide. We believe that making savings simple enables success. This slide depicts a variety of hybrid communications and tools for both employers and members. From supporting employers with a toolkit to providing members with calculators and even a mobile app, VRS empowers members to save for their future. Next slide, please. To encourage and educate hybrid retirement plan members about their plan and the importance of making voluntary contributions, we've developed a hybrid learning channel with a series of bite-sized videos specifically designed for this population. Next slide. Turning to the optional retirement plan for higher education, or ORFE. As Kimberly mentioned, I'll just share again that VRS has made improvements to the plan by implementing best practices, which will ultimately lead to better outcomes such as fee savings and increased performance for our members. Next slide. I'll just take a moment to compare VRS's service delivery to our peers. In our view, what gets measured gets managed, and our results are compelling. Next slide, please. CEM, which works with over 400 plans worldwide, performs benchmarking for VRS. Next slide. According to CEM's benchmarking analysis, VRS pension administration cost falls $22 below the peer average of $103. Next slide. But cost isn't the only important measure. When comparing VRS to other US peers, our service delivery score of 82 exceeds the peer median. This graph plots both service and cost effectiveness. As the yellow arrow indicates, VRS can be found in the favorable quadrant, where we provide a high level of service at a lower cost when compared to other US peers. For well over a decade, VRS's results have been placed in this desirable quadrant. Next slide. Now we'll move on to funded status and contribution rates. Next slide, please. The funded status of a pension plan is the ratio of the assets available to pay benefits compared to the plan's liabilities. It's a commonly used measure to gauge the health of a plan. This graph shows the funded status of the teacher plan since 2004. The slide also notes the plan's unfunded liability of approximately $13 billion as of June 30, 2019. As of June 30, 2019, the funded status of the teacher plan was 74.1%. The green bars here represent an estimate of the future funded status of the plan using data as of June 30th, 2019, and assuming that the fiscal year 2020 market return would be 1% and return 6.75% thereafter. Under those conditions, the funded status is expected to decline somewhat to about 70%. However, as our chairman and CIO mentioned in their remarks, our market return for FY 2020 will likely be closer to an estimated 2%. As a result, any decline in funded status is estimated to be slightly more muted than shown here. Next slide, please. Similarly, this slide shows the estimated funded status of the state employee plan using the same return assumptions and parameters. The slide also notes the state plan's unfunded liability of approximately $6.5 billion. As of June 30, 2019, the funded status of the state plan was 75.2%, but again, expected to decline somewhat as a result of FY20 market returns. Again, the estimated funded status might be slightly better than shown here due to better than previously anticipated FY 2020 returns. Next slide. This table presents the employer contribution rates for the plans, which the General Assembly acted to fund for the coming year. The table also provides the estimated general fund and non-general fund dollars needed to support those rates. These rates will remain in place for both FY 21 and 22. I should note that the Governor's and the General Assembly's funding of the certified contribution rates avoids adding to the plan's unfunded liabilities through underfunding and contributes to the overall health of the plans. We're gratified by this demonstrated commitment to funding the contribution rates, which has been viewed positively by rating agencies. Next slide, please. For your reference, these are the contribution rates to support the other post-employment benefits, which include group life insurance, the health insurance credit, the Virginia Sickness and Disability Program, and the Virginia Local Disability Program. Next slide, please. I'll conclude with a few comments regarding our most recent stress testing and sensitivity analysis report. Next slide. VRS has routinely performed stress testing of the plans. The 2020 report focused primarily on potential impacts on the plan related to COVID-19. In the interest of time, I've highlighted two exhibits from the report to show the potential impact related to COVID-19 in terms of magnitude and potential direction on future contribution rates and funded status, just for the state plan. Next slide. This graph provides a range of estimated future contribution rates with probabilities surrounding the outcomes. Under the baseline case, which is the black line, rates would have been expected to trend downward as unfunded liabilities are paid down and plan costs reduce as more members become covered by the hybrid plan. The adjusted base case incorporates the estimated returns for fiscal year 2020. That's sort of the blue and red line. As mentioned, we now expect the return for FY 2020 to be closer to 2%. At the time of this report, the analysis that we did used a conservative estimate of a return of 0%. Therefore, expected future contribution rates, while still increasing, would be anticipated to be slightly lower than those depicted here. Next slide. This graph from the stress testing report provides the estimated funded status for the state plan over time, given the same parameters discussed in this prior slide. Assuming no additional investment gains or losses beyond fiscal year 2020, as depicted in the adjusted base case scenario, which is the line again with the red squares, we would still expect the funded status to decline over the next 5 years as the FY 2020 loss is fully recognized. Next slide. It's our privilege to help our members plan for tomorrow today, and VRS is honored to serve our members who serve the Commonwealth in a variety of ways each and every day. This concludes my prepared remarks. Thank you for your time and interest in VRS, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or follow up as needed.
Questions from members of the commission? Unmute yourself and raise your question. Well, thanks to the VRS staff for that most inclusive report in certainly a challenging time. And thank you for the vigilance that you continue to show in working to support our members who are in retirement or looking forward to retirement. So hearing no questions, then it is the requirement that the commission a vote to receive the oversight report. As Hal mentioned to you earlier, that does not indicate acceptance, support, whatever. It's simply to acknowledge that you have received the oversight report. I would want to mention that also Delegate Torian is joined us via telephone, and he will be part as well. So maybe if you want to unmute everybody, I'll ask for a motion to receive the JLARC VRS Oversight Report.
So move.
It's been moved, and is there a second to Senator Janet Howe's motion that we receive the Oversight Report? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is there any opposition? Hearing no opposition, then the report is received. Thank you. And now, Hal, if we could, we'll move on to the 529 Oversight Report, which is likely to be as tantalizing and as involved as the VRS report, but important work. Thank you for what you're doing. Hal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'd like to introduce Jamie Bitts, who will present our biennial report on Virginia 529. Jamie?
Well, thank you, Hal. I apologize for the delay in just getting the technology right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. As Hal said, my name is Jamie Bitts, and I'll be presenting our biennial oversight report on the Virginia College Savings Plan, also known as Virginia 529. This report is required under the Virginia College Savings Plan Oversight Act. That act gives JLARC broad oversight authority over Virginia 529, and the main elements of that authority are listed here on the slide. We submit this report to you every 2 years, and the topics that I'll cover this morning are listed here on slide 3. Now, just to start with some brief background information, state 529 plans are authorized by the Internal Revenue Code. They're tax-advantaged savings programs for education as well as for individuals with a disability. And nearly every state in the country has established at least one 529 plan. Now, Virginia 529 directly manages 3 savings programs. Those are an education savings program called Invest 529, a legacy prepaid tuition program that was closed to new participants last year, and then a disability savings program called Able Now. And together, those 3 programs have about $7.5 billion in assets under management. Virginia 529 also sponsors 2 national education savings programs. One is College America, which has about $61 billion in assets. And the other is a relatively new disability savings program called Able America. And I'll take just a few minutes to talk about Virginia 529's defined benefit program for college savings. Now, the legacy prepaid fund that's managed by Virginia 529 declined in value earlier this year. That was largely because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the market volatility that resulted. As of the end of March, the fund had declined by 10% to roughly $2.5 billion in assets. That legacy fund is spread across 3 types of assets. More than half of the fund is fixed income assets, such as government bonds. About a quarter of the fund is in public equity or stocks. And then the remainder of the fund is in alternative assets, such as real estate or private equity. Now, the total prepaid fund underperformed all of its benchmarks, with the exception of the since inception benchmark. This was largely due to the fund's assets being overweight in public equities, and then underweight in alternative assets. And those alternative assets do have the potential to provide more steady returns during periods of market volatility, like what's been experienced in recent months. Now, the returns at the asset class level also generally underperformed their benchmarks. The one slight exception to this was the alternative asset class, which outperformed the benchmarks for the 3 and 5 year periods. Now, in 2019, the Virginia 529 board revised its target asset allocation policy. They did this in order to reduce the overall amount of risk to the fund. The main change was reducing the percentage of assets that are allocated to public equity by about 10 percentage points, and then increasing the allocation to alternative investments by roughly the same amount. The funded status of the legacy prepaid fund did reach an all-time high in 2019 of 152%. That equates to an actuarial reserve of a little more than $1 billion. That the actuarial analysis that was done last year estimated a 99% probability that the fund's assets would exceed its future obligations. And because of the fund's strong funded status, we recommended in our 2018 oversight report that Virginia 529 develop guidelines for reducing its pricing reserve, which is essentially an add-on fee to its prepaid accounts. The following year, the General Assembly passed legislation that capped the pricing reserve at either 5 or 10%, depending on the actual funded status of the fund. Now, the high funded status of the prepaid fund also makes it possible to consider options for supporting college affordability. And one option would be for Virginia 529 to very carefully consider whether any kind of pricing reserve or its equivalent would be needed in the future. The other option would be to examine how Virginia 529's excess operating revenue could support college affordability. Right now, by statute, that revenue is allocated to the prepaid fund, but there may be other ways to better support affordability. Virginia 529 also changed 2 key assumptions it makes about the legacy prepaid fund. It reduced the long-term investment return that it assumes, and that's now set at 5.75%. It also reduced the amount of tuition growth that it assumes in the future. And it was able to do that in part because the General Assembly has provided additional funding for colleges and universities in recent years. And as a result, tuition increases over that period have been fairly minimal. As I mentioned, the Legacy Prepaid 529 program was closed to new participants last year. Virginia 529 is developing a new defined benefit program in its place, and that's scheduled to open early next year. That new program will pay the same enrollment-weighted average tuition payout, regardless of which college or university the student attends. JLARC staff did look very closely at this approach in 2018, and we found that it would address the concerns with the legacy prepaid program. Those concerns had to do with a lack of purchasing flexibility, which made it difficult for families to buy and establish prepaid accounts. Differing payout amounts that depended on the college that was attended, and then declining participation in the program over a number of years. And going forward, it will be important for Virginia 529 to very closely monitor the new program to make sure that there is adequate participation in it. I'll take just a few minutes to talk about Virginia 529's other education savings programs. In both the College America and the Invest 529 programs, there was growth in the number of accounts and overall assets, and this slide just shows you those increases. So you can see, for example, that assets in the Invest 529 program grew an average of 14% over the last 10 years. This slide just summarizes the investment returns for those two programs. You can see that a majority of the College America options outperformed their benchmarks. On the other hand, a majority of the options for the Invest 529 program underperformed their benchmarks. Turning to Virginia 529's disability savings programs, the Able Now and Able America programs allow tax-advantaged savings for individuals with disabilities. Both of these are relatively new programs. Able Now has just under 8,000 accounts and about $33 million in assets, and its portfolio options underperformed its benchmarks. The Able America program is much smaller, and it's still too new to evaluate its investment returns relative to benchmarks. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, legislation was passed during the 2020 session that directed Virginia 529 to study a potential state-sponsored retirement program for private sector employees in Virginia. That legislation directed them to look at several different topics as part of the study, including the level of interest among private employers in a program like that, the cost of a program and potential options for funding it, the experience of the, I believe, 11 other states that have these types of programs, and then maybe most importantly, the appropriate state entity that would manage or could manage such a program in Virginia if it was created, whether it's an existing agency or whether that would be a new entity that would be created. And that's an important question because giving Virginia 529 responsibility for a retirement program would significantly expand its mission. And Mr. Chairman, we'll continue to monitor the progress of that study and its results. Those results are due in December of this year. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I had planned to talk about. I know that was relatively quick though, so I'm happy to answer any questions there may be.
It might be advisable to go ahead and hear from the staff of 529, Mary Morris and Michael Nguyen, and then we'll respond to questions. So could we just, how's it appropriate to go ahead and Mary make her presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. We can have Mary present now. Mary?
Okay, I am bringing up my presentation. I think. There we go. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to brief you on what's happening at Virginia 529 and Able Now. I'm Mary Morris, CEO. I'm going to cover today our programs, focusing on the upcoming successor to our successful prepaid 529 program, and then the study of state facilitated retirement programs that Jamie just mentioned. I'll review the impacts of recent events on us and the actions taken by our team and the reactions of our customers. And then Investment Director Michael Nguyen is going to cover investments and information on our legacy prepaid program. This slide will look familiar to many of you. We tend to use this. It represents our history from inception in the mid-90s with the original prepaid program through today with our multiple education savings programs, Able Disability Savings Programs, and our SOAR Virginia Early Commitment Scholarship Program. I draw your attention though to the box in the bottom left, which highlights the coming new program, which will be housed for customers in our Invest 529 program, but managed as a part of the prepaid 529 program. This slide is similar to one that Jamie had. My only comment here is to note our place in the 529 enable industries, who represent more than 1/5 of the national 529 market and more than 1/10 of the national disability savings market. For some program updates, 2 points I'll note briefly on this slide are how we've maximized returns in the low yield FDIC portfolio for our customers, and then the administrative fees for Invest 529 and College America were reduced as of January 1. Our scale allows us to regularly look at fees and reduce costs to our customers when possible, while still covering our expenses and expanding our education savings mission to make college more affordable and accessible to all Virginians, and our disability savings mission to enhance the quality of life and movement towards independence for citizens with disabilities. My main program update for you today, though, is about progress in developing a new defined benefit option. That change was authorized last year, and after a final enrollment period in 2019, we're hard at work on the successor. Our 4 guiding principles are outlined for you here in developing the new program. That is to be more flexible, more affordable, more simple, and more certain than the legacy prepaid 529 program. So how do we propose to improve upon a very successful program, but one that had become so expensive it was beyond the reach of most Virginians, and so complex in the benefit structure that it simply wasn't growing the way our savings programs have grown in recent years? First, we've looked at creating a more flexible program. The new defined benefit portfolio will be within Invest 529, so it'll be easier to find, and customers can see it as a part of a holistic approach to education funding. The new option may be used for any qualified higher education expenses, and the account owner will be in charge of the how, when, and where of using their benefits. Next, we're building an option that's more affordable. We can't impact the cost of education, but we can make getting started easier and more affordable. We've eliminated the need to purchase a minimum of a single semester, which in our last enrollment period was almost $10,000. Instead, we've retained the concept of tuition, the normal full-time, in-state, undergraduate tuition and mandatory fees assessed to all students, and overlaid that with the concepts of average tuition, which will be the enrollment weighted average cost of our 15 public colleges and universities, and units instead of semesters. 100 units will represent 1 year of average tuition. So although one still may make a lump sum purchase, you also may just get started, as with any other Invest 529 account, with a $25 contribution and start accumulating units. On the next slide, I'll show you a bit about how that will work. Finally, there's simplicity and certainty. As a portfolio within Invest, contributions and distributions will be streamlined. This program will have a single benefit, average tuition, as that changes each year, and pricing will also be based on average tuition. We do not anticipate any reserves for this program. Whether your student goes to the least or most expensive Virginia public university, a Virginia private institution, goes out of state, attends community college, or completes a certificate program, each unit applied to costs will have the same value, and the account owner can decide how many to use at any time. There will be no contracts, no payment plans, and no finance fee for installment payments. Our marketing team has been planning for the new portfolio for some time. We use a multi-platform strategy, and this new program will tap into all of that. We're developing a calculator, which will help families decide how to invest in this new program. We will have videos, webinars, and written materials to educate everyone about the new option, and I'll look forward to perhaps previewing some of that with you the next time we meet. We'll not focus on the differences between this and prepaid 529, but highlight instead the why of using the new program and its unique attributes as they relate to the 4 pillars I just reviewed. This change also better aligns with the future of post-secondary education, with its emphasis on stackable credentials, apprenticeships, and lifelong education. The slide you're viewing now shows you where average tuition falls on a chart, showing the current cost of each Virginia public university. We're also showing the average room and board cost at Virginia public universities. That's the green bar towards the bottom of the chart. And the average tuition plus average room and board towards the top of the chart. And finally, average tuition at Virginia private universities. The calculator also will include community colleges and some other examples, but this just shows how it's laid out. Later this summer, the board will make a final decision about the maximum number of units we may purchase, but our recommendation is 1,000. This would allow a purchaser to accumulate sufficient units to cover the full tuition cost, including with differential tuition added in, at any Virginia public university. The average tuition and room and board at many Virginia public institutions, or most or all of the tuition cost at a Virginia private university. By starting with 2 years at a community college, which would only need about 80 units, only 200 to 250 units would cover almost all the tuition needs for a 4-year degree at many Virginia universities. So we hope that this will make this program more affordable and get more families started saving for education. I'm going to shift gears now and move on to our Able Now and Able America program. Not a whole lot of information on this, but I want to point out the steady growth since opening in late 2016. These are still small programs, but they are growing nicely and steadily. We continue to work on federal legislation will make it easier to grow these important programs. We continue also to find the intersections between our education and disability mandates. The importance of education in all its many forms is critical to all aspects of life, whether you have a disability or not. We continually look at ways to mesh these two aspects of our mission to help people dream, save, and achieve. SOAR Virginia is heading into its second decade and has become an important part of our commitment to serve underserved communities, to be more inclusive, reaching families at all household income levels. Our SOAR scholars have to meet certain criteria, and one is qualifying for the National School Lunch Program. We operate in some of the most challenged schools across the Commonwealth and look forward to continuing to expand the program to assist more students in attaining post-secondary education. We started SOAR in 2010 with 100 students in 7 schools and 1 access provider. This year, we added 1,000 new students and are providing resources in 117 schools across 60 school districts that reach from the Eastern Shore to Lee County. We also work with 5 access providers. This includes scholarship dollars each year added to a 529 account for each student and the advice of our college access advisors. Next, the state facilitated private retirement programs. During the General Assembly session this year, we provided assistance on a state-sponsored retirement program bill. Our agency's been involved in discussions around this topic for many years because of our experience in building platforms to assist citizens with important saving and investment goals. The concept was reviewed twice before, in 2015 with a VRS study and in 2018 by C&U. The fact that some 53% of Virginia employees have no retirement plan, 83% of them because their employer does not offer a plan, explains, I think, the continuing interest in a state-facilitated option. This year, the Assembly determined that more work was needed to sufficiently review the topic before moving forward, and we were asked and agreed to head up a new study. We will have continuing conversations with JLARC on this study as well to keep them informed. Our team has made significant progress in addressing the elements of the study. Pew Charitable Trusts and others are assisting us in this work, including completing a cost of doing nothing study. State agencies, including VEC, DARS, and DMAS, are bringing together data to evaluate and incorporate into the findings. We're reaching out to individuals and organizations who have expressed concerns in the past about these programs to identify and address their concerns. A quantitative market study will survey Virginia employers. In addition, we'll survey Virginia employees whose employers don't offer a retirement plan. We will explore anticipated startup costs for a program and estimate time to self-sufficiency. Because several state programs now are open in California, Oregon, and Illinois, it's possible to obtain some concrete data. We've had extensive interviews with these and other states contemplating similar programs. Throughout the summer and early fall, we will hold virtual outreach and listening sessions to gather information and provide information and background about these state-sponsored programs. We'll complete the study elements and draft the final report this fall. Our goal is to render sound analysis and implementation options for the legislature's consideration. Virginia 529 has no position on the public policy issue, although we always welcome the opportunity to serve as a resource based on our 25 years of experience in the investment space. Next, I'll move on to what's been happening in the current world situation. The second week in March, Virginia 529 began preparing for what looked like a coming shift in the way we do business. And by the end of the week, with the emergency declaration, what was planned as a test day of working from home turned into an until further notice remote working situation. Because we routinely do significant training and tabletops, and because we have invested in the ability to have all our employees, including our customer service team, work from home to prevent temporary office closings, we were able to quickly pivot to a work from home environment. We now are 4 months in and are able to sustain this format for the foreseeable future without a degradation of service to our customers or diminishment of our commitment to security and fraud prevention and detection. We're finding better ways to serve our customers and enhance our operations while in this status. We've enhanced our communications internally and externally, providing reassurance and information during an unsettling time. We're providing additional online resources and solutions for our customers, including more webinars and videos and enhanced online transactions. We've waived late fees for our prepaid 529 customers and made every attempt to ease the burden of the current environment. We've enhanced our training and communications platforms. And although we remain in a remote environment for the foreseeable future, we've also planned our return to the office and have some folks doing that now. We've installed appropriate signage and barriers, removed seating and tables to create social distance, and done all the things that we have been advised to do to make it safe to return to the office when that's appropriate. And along with the pandemic, with the rest of the country, we've been affected by the protests and discussions around racial and social justice and equality this spring, and have redoubled our efforts on diversity and inclusion within the agency, having had several agency discussions on the topic, and externally in our continuing commitment to serve underserved communities and to ensure that there are equal opportunities to make post-secondary education more accessible and affordable to all Virginians. So that's what the Virginia 529 has been doing since early March. What about our customers? How have they fared during this time? As you can see from this slide, March was an active month with what appears to be large inflows and outflows, particularly in March. But if we look closer, a different picture emerges. This slide, which compares March through May 2020 to the same period in 2019, tells the real story. As you can see in the bright green and blue bars, new money contributions in March 2020 were higher than normal, and in the next 2 months, new contributions remained strong. That means both that people continue to put money into their existing accounts and open new accounts and make contributions, all positive signs. In addition, the peach and blue-gray bars show internal movements of money, what we call investment direction, from one investment portfolio to another. Although March, when consumer confidence was low, saw the most movement of money between accounts, most often from more volatile equity portfolios to less volatile fixed income portfolios, that movement subsided by April and May. Even in March, though, the movement between accounts represented only 1.2% of assets in the Invest 529 program. That means that most customers stayed the course, which was the guidance provided on our website and in messaging to our customers. Volatile times always provide an important opportunity to review your investments and make sure they're appropriate and match risk tolerances. But a swift shift during volatility can have unintended consequences. My final slide tells that story. As you see what happened to the assets in Invest 529 over the last several months. After a terrible March, markets rebounded substantially April through June. So you can see that the dip in assets under management in March was erased over the next few months. Those who remained invested through the volatility saw their investments largely rebound. Just as we found during the last recession in 2008 and 2009, our customers understand the nature of their investments and understand they're in it for the long haul and don't panic during volatile times. For those approaching the time to use their accounts, they generally have already moved to more conservative allocations and do not experience the market volatility. That completes my remarks. And unless you have questions for me, I now turn control of the slide deck to Michael Wynn to review performance in the prepaid portfolio, asset allocation strategy, and legacy prepaid 529. Thank you.
Mr. Wynn, if you will go ahead with your report, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just go ahead and share my screen with you.
Somewhere I lost the transition slide, Michael. Not sure which one.
No problem at all, Mary. I think I can get this going here. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commission members. I appreciate the time this morning. And I just wanted to express our thanks to Kimberly and Jamie for their work with us the last few months in putting this oversight report together. Recognizing we're running out of time, I'll keep my comments fairly brief, but I do want to provide you with a quick overview of the investment performance of the legacy prepaid plan as well. On this slide, real quickly, I'm happy to report that the prepaid plan as the end of the last fiscal year is in sound financial condition. Jamie alluded this earlier during his portion of the presentation. The funded status is a little over 150%, as you can see here, which statistically tells us that we have a 99% probability of meeting payouts to the contract holders that own the prepaid contracts. You can see on this chart also that the funded status does ebb and flow and is highly dependent upon the prevailing economic and market conditions. While it's a busy slide, what you should take away from here is that the simple math on this slide essentially comes down to, can we as an organization continue to out-earn and our performance on the investment return out-earn the college tuition inflation? This is a question that we tackle pretty regularly, because as you can see on this slide, when there's significant market turmoil, as we saw in this past quarter, the portfolio experienced a negative return or unrealized losses of almost 12% for the first quarter of this year. However, as an organization, we tend to focus on the longer term return, which is the far left first column, the since inception numbers. Our long-term focus on this does have it underperforming our long-term rate of return assumption, which right now is 575. But as you can see here on this chart, with a volatile first quarter, we returned a 5.60% since inception. But market volatility, as you can imagine, is something we are not immune to. So we stay the course and we focus on our strategic asset allocation. By doing so, in the course of 2 short months, we participated in a remarkable rebound in the markets. As you can see here, looking at the since inception number again, between the 2 months of March and May, the portfolio turned around about an 8% return just for the 2-month period, which in effect had the effect of essentially providing or boosting our since inception numbers from 5 to 595, which you can see here, which is outperforming our since inception or since long-term numbers of 575. On this next slide, real quickly, I'll just touch on some of the factors, as Jamie alluded to earlier, about the underperformance that we've experienced. Again, the couple of slides here, the graphic just shows you what the remarkable 2 months have provided for us in terms of investment performance, just sticking to our strategic asset allocation. As I mentioned earlier, the fund has had issues with performance, and it's really more to the fact that we've had an overly defensive posture coming out of the financial crisis. Our bias towards smaller cap companies, floating rate securities, and what you could argue has been a decade of long growth were certainly contributing factors to underperformance. And across both our prepaid programs and our Invest 529 programs, we typically err on protecting assets and savings, so that too has an impact on our performance of the benchmark. I think I mentioned earlier that we tend to focus on the long-term since inception performance numbers. And as you can see here on this slide, annual returns are volatile compared to the long-term inception numbers. Our short-term measurement against longer returns is really a measurement of just annual performance. But as you can see on the lower column or lower row, at a 10-year annualized return, the prepaid portfolio has provided a 6.58% return, and since inception, a 6.26% return. So again, beating our long-term rate of return assumption of 575. One of the points that Jamie brought up earlier was the fact that our board, late last fall, adopted a revision to our strategic asset allocation, which we tend to review every 3 to 4 years. The goal of the review is simply to consider changes that could impact the dynamic between risk and return. So we explore a number of scenarios that determine the best risk-return forecast that models can project for us, taking into account liability of the prepaid program. What this chart is trying to illustrate is that the desired outcome resides in a shift to the northwest quadrant, where you're essentially trying to earn a higher return with less risk. So when the board updated the asset policy last year, which was last changed in 2009, you can see that it had a distinct effect of shifting 2009 to where we are now in 2019, up to that northwest quadrant. Some of the details of this shift are provided here in this slide, and Jamie spoke to this earlier as well, which at a high level, we decrease our exposure to public equities, taking that down by about 10%, and increasing our allocation to private or to alternatives, which is real estate, private equity, and hedge funds, to up 10%. That's really where the major shifts occurred. And as you can imagine, with a change to the long-term asset allocation policy, we anticipate reaching policy goals over the course of several years. I think CIO Ron Schmidt at VRS spoke to this earlier during his part of the presentation as well. And we too will experience a phase-in process as we move towards that long-term policy allocation. And then I think lastly, I will end my comments here, Mr. Chair, which is essentially to say that, as Mary spoke to earlier, the rollout of this new defined benefit program, we'll continue to manage any incoming assets in a similar manner as we have with a legacy prepaid program. There's certainly efficiencies to doing so, not only from a scale perspective, but also from a fee perspective as well. And even though the payout from the prepaid program compared to this new defined benefits program will be a little bit different, I think something to take away on here is the fact that what hasn't changed is that we are still tied to tuition inflation as the liability. And I think it goes back to the simple math I talked about earlier when I was discussing about our prepaid funded status. So, Mr. Chair, with that, I'll end my remarks and turn it back over to you and the Commission for any comments and questions.
Members of the Commission have questions. If you just unmute your mic and raise your question.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Howe.
Yeah, I have a question, and I think it's probably for Mary. And actually, it's two questions. My impression of this program has always been it mostly benefits the upper middle and upper class, and because they're the ones that can afford to put money into the program. And I'm wondering if that's true, and if it is true, what can we do to help the lower income families? I read somewhere once that even if a little amount of money, even $100 went into an account for a child, they were much more likely to go to college or some post-high school avenue. And I'm wondering what your comments are on that.
Yes, ma'am. Well, that is true. There are a number of surveys and studies like that, and there is certainly a lot of evidence that shows that any focus on higher education, I think that's the important part. And the CDAs and Washington University has done some studies, and we follow all of that. And there's a lot of activity right now around children's savings accounts. That's something that we have looked at over the years and spend actually a lot of time. Our board's been briefed on those at a retreat 2 years ago. We had an entire session on what some other states and cities are doing in terms of children's savings accounts. I will say I'm not convinced yet that that's the right solution. I think sometimes it sounds good to say you're going to open up an account with $50 in it for every child born in a state or a city or every kindergartner. But unless you have a way to track that and really get them engaged and continue to put money in, I just don't know what the track record for those will be. So I think it remains to be seen. That's one of the reasons we started the SOAR Virginia program over 10 years ago. That was our real foot in the door. And we've always seen that as, I still can remember the presentation we made to the board, that it was a spoke on a wheel, that it was the first step. And we think a really important step in trying to find ways to bring our programs to a very broad demographic, to underserved communities, particularly lower income households. And that's the reason that to participate in SOAR, our students have to qualify for the National School Lunch Program, which is 200% of the federal poverty level. And we are in, they're not Title I schools when you get to senior or to high school, but they are essentially Title I schools mostly that we're in. And we have really tried very broadly to work with Chev on underserved communities, underserved schools in that program. we would love to grow that. I appreciate the General Assembly sort of restored our base funding for that program this year, and we will look hopefully to increase that with the board and the General Assembly's blessings over time. So that program is one way we do that. We have done some very small matching grant programs. That's one way that a number of 529 programs around the country try to get lower income households to participate. I will tell you, I don't know. We have done over the years, you ask demographic questions, people don't like to answer them, whether it's on their application or through surveys. We have done some of that. We know that we're underrepresented. We just know that intuitively, I think, and from what we see at events and in communities of color, Blacks and Latinx communities, and we are working on that. We just had a discussion several months ago about how can we focus on that. I think our focus here to date has been on household income and then the rural horseshoe of Virginia, where again, there are many underserved pockets, and we found in studies that the difference or the similarities between urban communities and very rural communities are very similar. Sometimes a distrust of government and government programs, a distrust of saving and investment, lack of opportunity, lack of access, children who are going to be attaining higher education, maybe first generation. So, we're looking at all of those opportunities and truly working with the access providers that are in schools throughout the Commonwealth, and that's what we use for our SOAR program, is one of our best ways to get in front of these students who may have more need. So there is much more to be done. I will say, and again, on the household income part of it, I think you're right. I think these programs will always skew a little bit towards a middle class, upper middle income population. They are tax advantage programs. So they tend to, they're just going to be used more by families with more discretionary income. So that's a fact, and I don't think there's any way to dispute that. We work really hard, though, to include everybody. So that's a big part of our messaging and our marketing. It's saying, just get started. Don't worry about how much you can save, how much you have, how much it's going to cost to send your child to school in the future, but what can you do to get started now, and how can we help you? And so we have very low contribution requirements. That's one of the reasons for changing the prepaid program. When you have to commit to $10,000 just to get started and pay for it over time and have a contract that you have to pay every month, or you're going to, have fees assessed, that just was not feeling like the right program. And we really are focusing and working a lot with Chev now and with the community college systems on making other opportunities available and making sure that students and families know that there's no one single path to education. We think that's a part of our mission. And so we focus on stackable credentials and certificate programs and starting at community college. And then you can make it affordable, and you can sort of have a discussion going with families. And we use social media and a lot of other outlets for that, our webinars and our in-person meetings, when we hopefully can have those again in sometime, to really talk to families about what's possible. And again, so lots of things that we're doing and trying to do to increase participation, but that's definitely an issue for us and something we're aware of.
Other questions or discussion? Just unmute your mic if you'd like to raise a question or have further discussion. Well, hearing none then, we're open for a motion to receive the JLARC 529 Oversight Report. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
So moved and
Seconded.
And seconded by Madam Speaker. All those in favor say aye.
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 Unmute your mic for a moment so we can get all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Any opposition? Thank you very much to the staff and to all those who participated in the discussion, and to members. I know that this is a whole lot on your plate in one plop. So you've been very generous with your time in receiving this. To people who are watching the proceedings on YouTube, and the session is available to the public on YouTube, I want to remind the public as well as the members that we have written reports on all that has been presented to us today. And I know that members are going to go home now after these tantalizing verbal reports, oral reports, and study these things in depth. But seriously, If you have questions or concerns, members of the commission, send your inquiries to the staff. We want you to feel satisfied that the oversight is appropriate and that we're on the right track. Further, I will say to you, if you're in the public, know that these reports will be available on the JLARC website later today, where you again also can take a look at it in depth at the findings as well as the recommendations. So, Tyler, is there anything else to come before the commission?
Mr. Chairman, that concludes our agenda. The next proposed meeting of JLARC is at least tentatively set now for September the 14th. And at that meeting, we plan to present the findings from our review of regional and infrastructure economic development incentives, as well as from our review of the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity. I want to thank everyone for your attention and patience today, and we certainly look forward to seeing you in September.
Thank you very much. Hearing no other business to come before the commission, do we have a motion that we adjourn?
Move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Several voices, lips moving, saying we should adjourn. All those in favor say aye, and we will stay adjourned until our September 14th meeting, unless you were advised of another date in the future as events unfold in our pandemic. Thank you all very much for your patience and participation today. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And just for the public, I'll note quickly that the website where all those reports can be found is jlarc.virginia.gov.